Just before I hand over to Natalie, can I just ask if you have any questions at all? Please use the Q&A facility, the Q&A button down the bottom in the middle of your screen. And if there's any emergency issues, please use the chat, but we'll mainly be monitoring the Q&A. For those of you who don't know Natalie, she's been the CEO of FRRR since 2015, having joined FRRR in 2012. She lives in a small country town like many of the people that FRRR supports. And before joining FRRR, Nat consulted with Matrix on board, working with numerous not-for-profit organisations. I would, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Natalie.
Thanks, Julie, and hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and I really do appreciate all of you taking some time out to have this update from FRRR and allow a bit of time in what is a very busy time of year to hear about our observations and reflections of what's been happening and what the future looks like for our work and for regional communities. So before commencing, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all gathering today, and I imagine we are coming from many parts of Australia. I'm coming to you from Dja Dja Wurrung country, and I would like to pay my respects to their traditional owners and the elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to any elders that are joining us today in this gathering. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about the past year and a little reflection on some of FRRR's past 20 years. I'm really delighted that our chairman, Tim Fairfax, is joining us today, and he will be sharing a few of his reflections, and we'll be then sharing some information with you and updates about what the future is looking like for FRRR, our new strategy, and then I'm really delighted that we are able to bring some wonderful insights from some great community leaders in the northeastern region of Victoria to share some of their work and really bring us into some of the story of what's happening in their community and the great work that they're doing to lead their community. We will hopefully have some time for Q&As. Julie Weldon is going to be watching the chat function, so please do make sure that you pop those in as we go, and we'll aim to take those either as we go or at the end. So, as I alluded to just in the opening there, FRRR has just marked its 20th anniversary in 2020. In looking back, you know, over that 20 years, I really think it's just been a remarkable story, and I particularly would like to acknowledge the foresight and the wisdom of the founding members and patrons of FRRR, particularly Baillie Meyer and John Anderson, and our founding chairman, Ian Sinclair, who stepped down from the board only last year. You know, the context for regional Australia is complex, it's multifaceted, and is constantly challenged by disruption, but is nonetheless full of absolute optimism and absolutely wonderful people and places. And so to that end, we wanted to mark our 20th anniversary by really celebrating and paying tribute to all of the people and the places that have made that first 20 years of FRRR's work so important, and who have partnered with FRRR as it went from literally an idea to one that is now a really well-established organisation with a very strong track record and very strong foundations to take us forward into the next 20 years. So if you haven't had a chance or connected with it, we do have a YouTube page which features a number of different clips and beautiful reflections from all of our, well, not all of our, but a number of our key partners and long-term friends and community partners as well. So I encourage you to go and have a look at those. But the slide you're looking at there is just a bit of a montage of some of those. And I think as we mark that 20th anniversary, FRRR, as I said, is in a good position. When we reached that milestone, we had distributed $115 million to over 11,500 projects across Australia. And that's, you know, a lot of different communities and an amazing amount of contribution into those communities. And I think importantly, message of support, hope and partnership to work alongside those communities. And there are thousands of incredible stories amongst that. So it does position us to move into the new era in a good place. But of course, 2020, as we all know, has thrown some interesting curveballs for all of us. And has presented immense difficulties and challenges, as well as given us a lot of, I think, important insight into humankind and what we're capable of. And as you know, really 2020 has been a year of contrast and challenge. In some places across Australia, the drought broke, in places in New South Wales where they'd been really struggling for a long time. Yet in other places, the drought continued and has not been eased up. There are other places, as we know, so many communities across Australia that were affected by the really devastating bushfires over summer. And of course, that was a really difficult way to start 2020. And just as many of those communities were starting to look to how to think about their recovery, COVID came along and presented a huge number of barriers to that process and extra complications in how to support people and how to build back from that terrible disaster. And I guess from FRRR's perspective, we know that those challenges are there. They are always going to be there in one shape or another. It is just the world we live in. But what we believe is that in order to be able to really respond well and adapt to our changing environmental, social, economic conditions, there's a critical need for much stronger investment in social and physical capital and infrastructure. And we think that the best place for that is really at that hyper-local level, at the grassroots, within local communities, being led by people who know their context and their environment. And I'll talk to a bit more about that in a moment. But really what we believe is that when you invest at that level in particular types of, I guess, assets and capacity, we end up with improved livability and quality of life. We have increased attractiveness and competitiveness of regions and communities to really compete in the economy and perform well. And we have the opportunity to really foster innovation. And our rural communities, we know, are full of innovation. But in order to get to that place of being able to work in an innovative space and mindset, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the basics first. And that includes, community halls and infrastructure, making sure there's access to basic services like early years care, general health care, aged care services, opportunities for our young people. They're all really critical. And I guess from FRRR's perspective, just to reiterate, we think investment in those really strengthens the fabric of our communities and it strengthens their resilience to future disruption, which is what we need given the year that we've had. So in terms of FRRR's past year, well, particularly the last financial year, it was a significant year for FRRR. It was a record year in terms of our partnerships, in terms of the reach that we achieved in our engagement with communities across the country. And it was a record in terms of the funding that we distributed. So you can see there that we received $25 million in funding, which was double that of the prior financial year. Now, a portion of that was certainly around the bushfire response, and I'll talk to that a bit more further on. A portion of that was in response to drought as well, but a significant amount is also for that core ongoing work in strengthening the fabric and resilience of communities, whether they're in or out of a disaster. So that was a record year and our distributions were equally large. So in our terms, $14.9 million was the biggest distribution of funding we've made to date. And that is very much in thanks to our many partners and a number of you are on the line today. So thank you for that support. I think the interesting part of the story is also that our reach has really increased. So there are 479 distinct postcodes that we partnered with, and that's an increase, a significant increase on the prior year of only 295, which means that we're getting out into more communities and we are ensuring that the funding we're distributing is reaching more people, more places, and having more benefits and more flow-on effect. And of course, the statistics around, for what the money was for, it's not surprising that 44% of all of our funding in that financial year related to disaster resilience and recovery. And a significant portion of that, of course, was drought. It's important to also recognise that we've continued to provide funding to the 2009 Black Saturday affected communities, and that money continues to be spent down. And that's a part of that funding picture as well. And then, of course, we commenced funding for the summer bushfire recovery. So a portion of that funding has supported that as well. But I think it's interesting to note that the types of activities that were funded and initiatives were, they're fairly core requirements for communities to be strong and healthy places. You know, having appropriate infrastructure and equipment in order that communities can actually do their work well. Improving access to services and activities so that people can actually engage and live well in their community. And of course, you know, building the knowledge and skill base in communities is a high priority. And that includes leadership development. It includes the development of young people and their potential. And it also includes things like developing governance training and capacity building needs of our grassroots community groups who are doing so much work and they need extra support. I think the other important part of FRRR's work is the way that we target our support and our partnerships into some of the smallest and more remote communities. We have a particular, I think, love of our small towns and our more remote communities, but we especially focus on those because we recognise that there is structural disadvantage that exists purely by your distance and your location in many cases, and is exacerbated by that. And particularly in those communities as well, it can mean a reduction in fundraising capacity and a reduction in access to the philanthropic funding that's available. And FRRR plays an important role as a backbone to enable that kind of money to reach those kinds of communities. And so I'm delighted that in the last financial year, 41% of our funding was directed to those smaller areas and 26% was directed to our remote and very remote communities. So hopefully that is a reflection of where our value lies for those communities as well. So just before we go into what next for FRRR, as I said earlier, I'm really delighted that our chairman, Tim Fairfax, can join us today, and I'd like to welcome him to say a few words before we move on to what's next for FRRR. Thank you, Tim, and welcome.
Thank you, Natalie, and welcome everyone. And of course, thank you for your wonderful support that you give FRRR, and of course your interest in tuning into this webinar today. But it's through your support that that we're able to support remote and rural and regional communities with our grants. And at this time, it's we're able to reflect on the 20 years of the organisation, and in doing so, and I know Natalie's already acknowledged, but I'd like to personally acknowledge Bales Meyer and the Sydney Meyer Fund, and of course some of our founding partners, which included the Pratt Foundation. But I should also acknowledge, as a 20-year celebration, the wonderful work of Ian Sinclair, who chaired the organisation from the start, and I feel very humble that I am the second chair, and I feel a great responsibility for that, because we it is a wonderful organisation, and not only our chair but our board and the staff at FRRR play a wonderful role. Of course, we don't have to tell you that it's been an unusual year, but the FRRR has managed to just plod on without any hiccups at all. Even though the staff have not been able to get into the office, everyone's operated remotely, and I personally take my hat off to all of them for the work that they've been able to achieve during this difficult year. As we know, all the programs have continued, the grant making's continued, and it's just the interface of humans one to another that hasn't actually taken place, except by webinars or Zoom meetings. But so as a board, we're very proud that we've been able to been able to continue. And I suppose the one thing, I've been involved with lots of organisations over the years, but I think the FRRR gives me the most satisfaction. You know, I was on the board, and then I left the board, and then I was invited back to be chairman. And you know, it wasn't very hard to say yes when I was invited back, because I've admired the FRRR for so long and what they do out there in the community. And you know, it's an organisation that I'm, as I said, immensely proud of and continue to be proud of. So as we move forward, Natalie will now share with you our strategy that we as a board and as a team present to you. So I'll hand back to you, Natalie, and thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate those words, and I concur with you on Ian's tremendous legacy, but I will say it is an absolute delight, and we're extremely fortunate to have you stepping into that position. And it's, yeah, we're set for a good next 20 years and beyond as an organisation. Okay, so FRRR, amongst all of the other work that we were doing in the past year, we also spent quite a bit of time working through our new strategic plan for the next 5 years. And that included obviously reflecting on our focus areas, where the best value and contribution of an organisation like FRRR could be, and asking ourselves questions about, you know, where we've done well, where we might want to learn more, where we want to extend ourselves, and how FRRR's model could really be further advanced and leveraged for impact across regional Australia. And that included some work around considering our communications and engagement, and also considering our branding and things like our website, and the engagement tools that people we work with connect with. And I guess what we have come to reflect on and articulate is that we're always looking at the big picture at FRRR, and our strategic planning process involved that too. We took a very big look at FRRR and its work over the 20 years, but we also went to the fine grain and we looked at the detail and we tried to understand, you know, really in a fine way where we could be most useful and effective. And that is as relevant to the work and the way that we operate as it is to the process we undertook in our strategy. And so one of the best ways to explain FRRR's model and our approach is that, in fact, we are big picture. We work at scale, but we're fine grain, we're on the ground, and we're very connected to the detail and the stories of regional communities, and particularly those smaller communities. And so that's, you know, it really, I think, is a unique part of our work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'm really, you know, I guess pleased to share with you that we do have a brand refresh that we're giving you a sneak peek of today. It will be rolled out more broadly over coming weeks, but I'm delighted to share with you how that is shaping up. So some of you may not be familiar with the old look, but for those that weren't, it you know, it hadn't been really refreshed since we were formed back in 2000 or 1999, and so we've worked with the board and the staff team to really ask ourselves about how we could you know, take FRRR forward, both for the next 5-year strategy, but for the next 20 years and beyond, and really think about what we want FRRR to represent and how we want to engage and connect with our stakeholders. And so we've developed this new logo, and I won't spend too long on it, but just to explain its concept. It is really a symbol that represents FRRR's model as a connector and a conduit, as one that brings together community, philanthropy, business, government, and really invests in the capability and capacity in communities to develop their own ideas and their own solutions, and that they will take their own paths towards their own future vitality. We recognise that there's always intersections within all of our work, and therefore we take a holistic view, and this symbol should reflect a holistic and very interconnected kind of fabric lens of the way that we work and the way that rural communities operate. We know that nothing happens in isolation. There's a very connected story there. And we also want to play our part as an organisation in contributing to a dialogue and a narrative about our regional communities that is forward-looking, that has momentum, that is about a positive story, but that has the right investment put in around that to enable that momentum and that positivity. And we think there's a terrific story to tell and one to really back and invest in. But we don't want to continue to always be talking about rural communities in crisis. We need to really think about the opportunities and harness those as well. And I guess the other aspect to this new visual identity is that we feel that it's a really strong, stable, grounded mark, and that's from FRRR's perspective, core to our culture. We're very level-headed, we're close to the ground, and we stay true to our purpose at all times. We're very focused, and we're really focused on those connections and relationships. So I will move on to the strategy, but I look forward to any feedback on that and hope that it resonates, or at least conveys the level of excitement that we have about the future as well. So in terms of our new strategy, we've just done a bit of work in refreshing, I guess, our the way we talk about the work that we do, and also our mission, and making sure that we're crystal clear on our purpose, which is obviously critical. So for FRRR, we recognise FRRR is actually the only national foundation that is purely focused on ensuring the social and economic strength of remote, rural and regional communities. And our model is really about aligning capital between government, philanthropy and community purposes and investments so that we can really achieve those kinds of outcomes that we've been talking about. And so our mission, therefore, is about connecting goodwill with good purpose for the vitality of rural, regional and remote communities. And it's that connection of those purposes and those capitals that is where the magic lies, and it is where there is immense power and potential. And really, the concept of vitality is a different word that we're introducing into our mission and our strategy and our work. And that is because vitality brings with it a concept of, physical and mental health, a feeling of aliveness, healthy, capable, energetic. And for us, that's what rural Australia is. And we need to start talking about it in that way. So again, this is part of our goal of just trying to talk about regional Australia differently and using language that is actually as vibrant as those communities are. And apologies, I'm trying to move us forward and it's just not going. There we go. Apologies, everyone. So to FRRR's model, and I know many of you are very familiar with the way that we work, but for those who are newer to FRRR, it is quite a unique model, and one that there are not too many other examples of, particularly when it comes to regional development and communities. So essentially we leverage different forms of capital. We have very long-standing, strong partnerships that span philanthropy, government, business, and of course, community. And we really work to leverage that as a collective model. And FRRR works in a way as a backbone for philanthropy of sorts, but there's also a really strong investment model there in terms of how to build collective capital and put that to great purpose in communities. So we have 3 key focus areas that we've agreed on between the board and management team for the next 5 years. And that is about people and places, disaster resilience and climate solutions, which I'll talk to in a moment, and I guess the intersection between people and places and disaster resilience. So these 3 areas work not in isolation, but feed each other. And importantly, what we're trying to do over the next 5 years is really utilise more of the tools in our toolbox, so to speak. So what we've done the most of historically is our granting and developing work, and that is always going to be the most significant and important part of our work. And that is distributing grant funding and providing additional capacity building support to communities and coaching and mentoring and really working alongside them as they're developing their ideas and initiatives. But we also think that there's a very important part of our work that is about sharing insights and learning. We receive many hundreds of applications, well, in the thousands of applications for funding each year. We have conversations with hundreds of different community leaders, and we're connecting with so many different parts of communities that there's a very powerful story to tell, and we want to be able to use that more powerfully. So we'll be doing more of that work. That will include convening more roundtables, preparing more insight papers and distributing those, running more events, and trying to bring more community voices into different forums, such as we're doing today with our speakers later on. And the other important part of our work is our leveraging and brokering, which really picks up on FRRR's DGR1 status, which is specially listed in the Tax Act and enables us to really do some interesting things with philanthropic capital that not many other foundations can do. And there's a whole other conversation in that piece alone, but I'll get to those a bit later on. But an example of the insights and learning that I'll share is that this week we convened a roundtable of funders who are working in the South Coast area of New South Wales around bushfire recovery. And we recognised that there was a significant amount of funding available for those communities, but some real challenges in coordination of that funding and some real pressure being experienced by those communities in being able to take advantage of that funding. And so we thought we could play a role in actually bringing together funders, both from government, corporate, philanthropy, and actually learn about what each other's funding opportunities were and whether we could actually work in a more effective way to support those communities. So we literally held that on Monday, and we'll be doing more of those across the fire affected areas to really support those communities to maximise the opportunity, but also reduce the burden being placed on them. And through all of that work, we're really constantly working through recognising that there are cycles of development within communities, and it's not linear by any means, but we know that there are a lot of gaps in our communities, and there are a lot of critical infrastructure needs that are at a very micro level in terms of the hyperlocal and very hard to get funding for. So we believe that there's an important role for us in seeding and strengthening those communities to just get off the starter blocks and get some of those things and those gaps filled. We also really take a focus on capacity and resilience, and particularly when there is major disruption. And we focus in on how to support communities to strengthen their capacity while, I guess, they're adapting and evolving to a changed environment. And then in some environments, and hopefully more, there's momentum that builds, and that happens over time. And when you get that momentum, you really have to get behind communities and help them to propel and keep going forward and really harness all those ideas and all of that energy and capital. And that's where you see communities really fly and build their long-term viability and vitality. So that's really a broad high-level outline of our strategy and the way that we're kind of organising ourselves over the next 5 years. And again, all of this work is being done at, at scale, at a national footprint, but also at that kind of fine-grained level as well, and always listening in. So further to the focus areas that I just mentioned earlier, they are around people, place and disaster resilience and climate solutions. As I said, these are interconnected, they don't operate in isolation, and we are working on them at all times. But really what we believe is that they are the enabling conditions for communities to be really vibrant and strong and to be able to adapt to changed environments. And so our strategy, I guess, is quite issue agnostic, but we're really interested in strengthening those underlying conditions. And so that is about people. It's about local not-for-profit organisations and community groups. It's about strengthening leadership capacity development and about ensuring that people in communities have access to opportunities so that they can grow and develop, and then they can lead their own communities. We think place is critical. And when we say place, we mean that every location, whilst it might have some similar characteristics and things happening, they're actually very individual in terms of their own context and the own environment that they're working in. And that might be their environmental context and profile, it might be their industry profile, it might be their population size, it might be their distance from a major city. They've all got their own story, and all of those things intersect in different ways for different communities. And so when we do our work, it is with a recognition of that diversity and that uniqueness, and really having a whole of place approach to our work, and strengthening place in recognition of that as well. And we believe that disaster resilience and climate solutions are really critical. And if we're not working on those, we're probably missing a big part of the story. And what we know from this year alone is that natural disasters and now pandemics are one of the biggest threats to our communities, and regional Australia bears the brunt and feels those first and foremost, and it has a significant effect on the rest of the country. We've had a track record working in disaster recovery and resilience since 2007. It's not new work for us by any means, but it is one that we believe more needs to be done on, and we need to focus more on the resilience side than just the recovery and response side, because these events are going to continue to happen more frequently, and the severity of them is just going to either increase or be more unpredictable. Is probably the word. So our approach is really about having, again, that partnership model, but really investing in solutions alongside communities. So on to now and what we're seeing, and I hope you, share with me that the observations that we will share with you, are consistent with what you're seeing and hearing. But if you're hearing something new, we'd also love to keep that conversation going. But in essence, I suppose what we've seen so far, and the data I'm about to share with you is really just from Q1 of the financial year. So a lot has happened since then, because we're just about at the end of Q2. But essentially, the trends that we're starting to see, or continuing to see, I should say, are that particularly since COVID, but also the successive impacts of other disasters, that there is a significantly increased risk of our small community groups folding under the pressure of the environment we're in. Fundraising capacity is absolutely depleted because of economic pressure. Local sponsorship opportunities are really challenged in a lot of communities, and businesses are doing everything they can, but it's just very tough. We've got increased vulnerability, increased risk, increased pressure on those organisations to provide support. And we've got significant volunteer fatigue, that those community leaders and people who are just working so hard to keep things moving are very, very tired, and there's very limited capacity support coming in, and it's really important that we increase that. And the types of organisations we work with are typically volunteer run, and those volunteers typically also might run their own businesses, and they might also have a whole range of other things, and they'll often wear multiple hats and be on multiple committees in their community. So you're talking about a relatively small number of people driving a huge amount of things in their towns, and it's not surprising that they're tired. And I think it's important for us as funders to appreciate that we can't expect that social capital to keep on being contributed if we don't top it up, and we have to nourish it in order to keep it moving. Our demand is continuing to grow from those communities, and one of the areas that I'll share with you in a moment is that there's significant increase in demand for just general organisational capacity. So we're getting a lot of requests for things that organisations have realised they either can't fundraise for or they weren't ready for. So COVID brought in a whole range of challenges around digital inclusion. And there are a lot of organisations that didn't even have laptop computers to work with, didn't have IT infrastructure. So we've been supporting a bit of that as well. But I suppose the context that we're seeing in terms of the threat and the risk for our communities at the moment, particularly with that context of the local community groups really struggling, is that the consequences of losing that fabric in our rural communities is absolutely devastating. If those groups do go under, it's very hard to get them going again, and it's very hard to build up your volunteer base again. So if we don't invest in them, we really will, I think we'll feel it as a country. And so our view is that it really calls for a collective approach that mobilises capital and that really harnesses all of that goodwill and puts it into the hands of those people and communities. So this, again, I preface with it is just Q1 data, but this is from our granting work across all of our programs just in Q1 of the financial year. So what it tells us is that there's been a really significant increase in requests for initiatives that support community health and wellbeing. So that includes mental health, it includes physical health, and programs and activities that support people to be well. I will also say that we are currently reviewing a number of grant applications, and so whilst the The success rate looks very low. That's likely to change this quarter because the approvals will go through before the end of the year. So there's just a caveat here that it's a point in time data. Nonetheless, the green line is probably what's most useful to look at. So it shows community health and wellbeing, organisational resilience and capacity, which is what I was just speaking about, and building community resilience, which is a very broad category, but that includes for us things like upgrades to community meeting places, supporting activities and community groups to put on events and activities that help people to stay connected in their communities, for example. So it's a very, very high level of demand. You can see there that the demand has increased substantially on the prior quarter. So the growth is really significant, and it tells us about the situation in particular around fundraising capacity, which is what we're hearing a lot about from local community groups. They just haven't been able to do that fundraising, and therefore they're looking for other sources of support. And I think that's going to have quite a long tail. It won't finish all that soon. It's going to be a while. Okay, so I'll just take us through a few examples around our strategy and what we're seeing and hearing and what the focus is. So under our people category, we had a range of different programs in operation that included our flagship small grants program, Strengthening Rural Communities. We had our Haywire Youth Innovation Grants program, which some of you might be familiar with, the Back to School Voucher program. We continued our partnership with ANZ Bank for the Seeds of Renewal program, and provided a number of grants through our sub-funds with our other donors and not-for-profit partners as well. So in here, again, what we're seeing is significant need for organisational capacity support and community resilience and health and wellbeing. Whilst that data is quite high and there are currently 76% of unmet requests, it will still be high even when we do make those allocations. And we expect that that'll come down to probably a gap of around 30 to 40% still requiring funding that we haven't been able to meet that request for. So it's really a critical area, and I think one to keep watching. An example of a project that we supported was the Georgetown Neighbourhood House in Tasmania. So they support, community members and families who are experiencing quite a high level of disadvantage in their community. And they needed help to actually get information out about their services during COVID. They had to communicate differently to the way that they would have ordinarily. So we provided a $10,000 grant through the Sydney Myer Fund through our SRC program. And that allowed them to hire a communications officer so that they could make sure they were reaching out to the people in their town who really needed help, and that they could be very targeted in reaching those people and making sure that they didn't fall through the gaps during COVID. So very, very critical work. And despite a lot of the activities they were offering being disrupted by COVID, they really showed a great adaptability in thinking outside the square and thinking about how they could continue to do their work without being able to do it in person. So they did a whole range of things also, which were quite fun in terms of online bingo, which I think is that image. It is. They had a great sort of fun approach to their work as well, and provided people with a great circuit breaker to what was a very stressful time. So really, again, powerful. $10,000, not a huge amount of money, but enabled them to continue to do their very important work. I would like to just alert you to a new flagship program that we launched in the last year, and that is in partnership with the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation as our founding partner. And we were delighted to have the Snow Foundation join us as well. So that program is called Investing in Rural Community Futures. It is focused on, at the moment, 6 towns in New South Wales. It's a 5-year program with overall about $1 million going into each of those communities over that 5 years. It is solely focused on strengthening the not-for-profit organisations within those communities. So we will work alongside them. They are each developing their own roadmaps as a sector, and those roadmaps articulate the needs of their organisations both individually and as a collective, and we are working alongside them, providing facilitation support, skilled support and grant funding. Just by chance of their location, 4 of those communities are in bushfire affected areas. So that's Nanducca Valley, Bateman's Bay, Nowra and Ulladulla. So we are I guess, approaching that capacity building through the lens of recovery as well. So that program is still very new, but we will be sharing insights as we go as to what really helps in strengthening those communities. So again, we'll move on to place, and I'm just mindful I really want to allow a bit more time for our speakers, so I'll scoot through these a bit. But as I said earlier, we really do believe that place and location and context are central to the future and the solutions that communities have for their challenges. So an example of a grant that we provided recently, which I think speaks to that aspiration and that sort of concept, was an early childhood facility feasibility study that we helped to fund in Burke in New South Wales. There's a significant amount of really strong community-led development happening in the Burke community, and this project is one of them that the community is leading there. And the idea there is that they really, there's only one provider of early childhood services in Burke that we were aware of. And they really do play an essential role. It's quite a remote community. There's a lot of structural disadvantage affecting that community. And they really, early years, there's a lot of evidence about the importance of early years in long-term wellbeing and sort of life success. So that was actually a fairly large grant. It was $57,000, and that was to develop a feasibility study for a purpose-built childcare facility that also had an integrated health service in it. So that's a bit of a watch this space, and we think that it could be a transformational concept for that community and potentially, a blueprint of sort for other communities as well. So again, on the concept of place, what we recognise, and I think is a unique part of FRRR's remit, is that economic renewal is so critical to a community's wellbeing and prosperity. And through the last year, we've been able to support a huge number of projects that have really tapped into that intersection between economic renewal and social and community wellbeing and strength. The Gunning Arts Festival was an absolutely terrific event. We funded them originally to run an event where they were targeting 500 people. They had to change it to an online festival very quickly, and they got 55,000 people through their virtual event. So just a phenomenal result for them, but really not only lifted spirits, but created a huge opening for them from a tourism perspective. I won't go through each of these, but they're each really incredible projects, and I would encourage you to look them up if you're interested. And of course, we're very willing to make introductions and connect you with any of those initiatives as well. But I think that these projects really provide a good illustration of what's possible when you invest in people with good ideas and put the money in the right hands at the right time. So onto our final pillar, which is disaster resilience and climate solutions. And as I said earlier, significant part of our work has been for a very long time. And unsurprisingly, the first quarter of our financial year was heavily tilted towards supporting disaster recovery and resilience, in particular from the bushfires, but also drought. And so we will continue to really support that focus, and I'll move on to that in a moment. But in terms of climate resilience, we also think that that goes hand in hand with disaster resilience, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to work on those things in conjunction. And when we think about that, it's things like ensuring that community facilities are climate resilient, that people can actually gather there. So that includes all of the things from solar to air conditioning units through to energy security, water security and independence, so that if a disaster comes, they're actually able to operate and continue to provide activities, which we know we heard a lot about after the fires in summer. We also know drought, as I said earlier, whilst some areas across New South Wales have been very fortunate in the drought breaking, we also know that this is not over in many parts of the country, and it is continuing to worsen in some areas. So we are continuing to run the Tackling Tough Times Together grant program, which I'm really pleased to say won the Best Grant Award at the recent Australian Philanthropy Awards. That program has really had a significant reach and impact. Of course, starting a number of years ago with support from the Tim Fairfax Family Foundation and the Yugilbar Foundation, and then recently by a number of other donors, including the Australian government. Our focus, I guess, will continue to be in those areas in New South Wales and Victoria that are still drought affected, but what we're seeing and hearing is that WA, South Australia and parts of Queensland are still very much in drought and continuing to need support, and that has quite a long tail. As soon as the drought breaks, it doesn't mean that things are back to normal. They continue to need support for some time as they sort of reset and recalibrate following. So in terms of the bushfire context from summer, so we did raise a fairly significant amount of money, which we're incredibly grateful for. And so far this year, we've distributed $2.5 million to a range of different programs. We take quite deliberately and through a lot of experience, a focus on medium to long-term recovery. So whilst we are there early and we're listening and we're partnering, we're able to leverage funding early, we really focus our support on that medium to long-term recovery picture. And that's because we know from experience that come 12, 18 months time down the track, those needs will continue to emerge, but much of the funding will have been allocated by then. And so we see FRRR as having an important role to be patient, to walk alongside communities and be ready when they're ready. We also do that in recognition of communities actually moving at different stages and different times, and recovery doesn't happen in a linear way, and every community is different. And so FRRR's approach is to just be there, listen, learn and respond. And that's certainly the approach we're continuing to take. As I said earlier, we are convening roundtables and discussions wherever relevant and appropriate for us to help to ensure a more coordinated approach. It's really hard work, but it's an important part of our role in that we're so connected to so many different parts of the funding environment. So we'll continue to do that throughout the recovery as well. And of course, always bringing the community recovery perspective to those conversations. Just a couple of examples of what we have supported in that environment. We've provided funding across all of the affected areas and states. And again, the projects are really about where the community's needs and priorities are, and they are quite diverse in their focus. So some are focused on emergency preparedness. And there's a heightened sense of wanting to be ready should something happen again. But also about ensuring people are able to access support through trusted local people. So we've supported a number of coordinator positions for local residents to actually act as that support mechanism in towns. And of course, young people and children have been a significant focus. So they're just a couple of examples, but again, I would reiterate that the needs are diverse and they're all different, and the importance of really being there and listening and having a broad approach to that funding has been important for us. I did want to just make a quick mention of another flagship program that we have been running for the last couple of years, which is focused on, I guess, proving up the value of community-led disaster preparedness. And we're just at the final stages of the New South Wales pilot, and we're just about to roll out into Victoria. And that's a cross-sectoral collaboration model where we're trying to really build the evidence base for that approach. And we'll be sharing the research report from that work in coming months as well. So again, look out for that one. But you can see there are a couple of the project examples from some of the communities that we partnered with in that project. Again, diverse, very much focused on the local context and what matters and is important for those communities. And I don't think we've got time, but we will share with you when we send out the link to this, a beautiful video that some children in one of those communities made during that project. Excellent. So that takes us through a little bit of update from FRRR's perspective and what we've been working on. I am really, really pleased to welcome two terrific guests from the Upper Murray region, Victoria, North-East Victoria, crosses into parts of New South Wales, who are going to speak to us about their experiences, about their sort of experiences in recovery and what they're seeing and what their plans are. And just in the meantime, I've just shared some slides here that just give you a bit of an insight and a taster for the community sentiment that we're hearing. And it is very, very multi-layered and very dynamic environment where people are dealing with multiple shocks and stresses on top of each other, all the while remembering that there was a world before the fires and that there was a lot of important work going on before that people are trying to also I guess, reimagine and restart. So with that in mind, I'm very pleased to hand over to Upper Murray Inc. I'll just try and get your slide up. So Jo and Ian, thanks very much for joining us. I think you might have your own slides to share. Is that right? No, you're just excellent. Let's move forward.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Natalie.
Thanks, Jo.
You can hear me. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and also thank you very much for FRRR. It's very comforting to know that there's an organisation such as yours that understands the importance of rural communities. Upper Murray Incorporated, or Upper Murray Inc, or UMI as it's called, is a unique community-based cross-border not-for-profit organisation that was created to drive the implementation of the Upper Murray 2030 plan, which was actually launched in November 2016. And our role is to advocate for the economic, social, health and wellbeing of the Upper Murray communities. So the Upper Murray region is a remote area located in the picturesque foothills of the Snowy Mountains and the birthplace of the mighty Murray River. It's located in Victoria in the eastern end of the Tauranga Shire and in New South Wales at the southern end of the Snowy Valleys Council. And the region includes towns such as Corryong, Cancoban, Tintwadra, Cudgewar, Tooma, Jingellic and Walwa. Agriculture has traditionally been the backbone of the economy, and the region supports a range of agricultural enterprises, predominantly cattle and dairying and other products including pasture seed production and grape growing. The Upper Murray, like so many parts of Australia, was severely impacted by the recent bushfires. 82 properties were destroyed, 548 farming properties were damaged, 23 wool sheds, 2 dairy sheds, 88 machinery sheds, 128 hay sheds and 15 irrigation pumps. It was estimated that there is in the vicinity of over 5,500 head of stock loss. The agricultural commodity loss in the Upper Murray included field crops of 926 hectares, silage 19,827 tonnes. I could go on and on. Some of the areas in the region were without power for nearly 3 weeks, and we were completely isolated. These figures really just illustrate the need for economic support for the Upper Murray, agricultural industry in particular, but the economy as a whole. The recovery process has been very well supported, but of course slow with COVID and the New South Wales border closures, which impacted on our community enormously. Social connectedness, which we all know is so important for recovery, is now only just possible, and the health and wellbeing of our community has been really foremost in our minds. The impact on local business in Corryong, which is the main town of the Upper Murray, will be evident for years. A thriving tourism industry supported by a substantial marketing campaign and a strong chamber of commerce is the way to economic stability for these businesses. UMI hopes to be part of this recovery process. UMI took a leadership role in the development of the economic and agricultural recovery plans, and we've worked hard alongside BRB, RDV, AgBIC, Tauranga Shire and Snowy Valleys councils to contribute to the municipal recovery plan, which will ultimately feed into the state recovery plan. A positive that has emerged through the bushfire recovery process is the opportunity to apply for projects that have been prioritised by the community. These priorities are closely aligned with those that were identified in the 2030 plan. BRB has provided grant writers to community groups, which has been a great initiative because, as you spoke so clearly about, Natalie, the volunteer burnout and fatigue is overwhelming. Ideally for UMI, 2021 will provide the community with the opportunity to fund a staff member to help reach our goals and to continue to build the capacity and resilience of this wonderful community. I hope that one day, if you haven't already, you might visit this beautiful region and understand our passion for where we live. I'd now like to introduce you to Ian Sessa, who's the Vice Chair, and he'll give you a brief overview of the projects that we've got on the go at the moment, or that we've actually achieved since our beginning. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm going to talk to you briefly about the 5 initiatives that are part of the Upper Murray 2030 Vision Plan. This plan has five key initiatives, and I'll go through each of them just briefly. So the first one was the development of the Great River Road as a major tourist route. So this is sort of borrowing what Great Ocean Road is already done, and applying it to the road that runs up the Murray River from Bellbridge in Victoria near Albury, and then along the Murray River Road and into the Upper Murray and ends at Cancoban in New South Wales. It's a beautiful part of Australia. Every time I drive it, I am amazed at the scenery, and I've driven it a lot. So it's hard to get tired of it. Another initiative was the creation of an Upper Murray brand, and you can see that brand on the slide that introduces us. This brand is now a registered trademark. It's owned by Upper Murray Inc., and it's available for local businesses to use to showcase the region that we live in and that they operate in. We also wanted to focus on making each of the communities in the Upper Murray a little bit more accessible to both to locals and to visitors. Many of you probably have a similar experience, but you know, you go to a small country town and you might go to the pub, or you might go to the cafe or something like that. But then you say, okay, so what else do we do? And they're just not very accessible at a walking level or on bikes. So what we're doing is creating town trails around each of our communities so that they're much more accessible both to visitors and to locals. Obviously, for our region, tourism development is a really important aspect, and Upper Murray Inc. has been working very hard over the last couple of years on the creation of a Marketing Upper Murray guide, and also the development of focused Upper Murray website, just to focus on our particular part of the region. And Jo has actually spent an enormous number of hours developing this. So my hat is certainly off to her on that dimension. The other area that we really need to do a lot more, and we're focused on, is the development of agriculture. As Jo said, we're focused mainly on beef and dairy production. So we recognize that we really do need to develop more value-added elements of those enterprises. We need to diversify in terms of agriculture as well. Interestingly, back in the 1950s, at the beginning of the Snowy Scheme, or during the development of the Snowy Scheme, we had a very strong horticultural area of activity here that's almost completely died out. We need to get that back as well. You know, it's consistent with the local food movement. It's consistent with what needs to be done in terms of disaster resilience and also in terms of climate change. One of the more difficult things that we're working on, and we're doing a lot of talking about it, and we're still trying to figure out how to do it, is to find better pathways for young farmers to enter farming, and also for those who want to retire to be able to do so with grace and dignity, and to be able to age in place if that's what they want to do. And we're sort of on our way to developing some programs on that dimension, but we're not quite there yet. And then as a result of the bushfires, we have also decided to focus on one overarching issue that was highlighted because of the bushfires, and that's the vulnerability of our power supply. We are actually at the end of a very long individual line feeder that comes from Wodonga through a bush that's relatively inaccessible. That creates all sorts of problems, not just in terms of our vulnerability to bushfires, but also to the quality of the power that we get and the reliability of that power. So to overcome those problems, what we're working on is the development of a virtual power plant in the Upper Murray and a series of mini grids that can run the Upper Murray in the event that we're cut off from our connection to the grid. That happened during the bushfires. We were cut off from power for, except for Corryong, the town of Corryong, those of us who were not in the town of Corryong, we were cut off for a minimum of 2 weeks, and some of us were cut off for up to 7 or 8 weeks. So we're trying to work on the development of mini grids and a virtual power plant to overcome that problem. That also happens to feed into initiatives related to climate change, because the creation of the virtual power plant is based on renewable energy sources and battery storage. So those are the things that we've been working on. Both Joe and I and the other members of the Board of Directors for Upper Murray Inc. have also been parts of the members of the various recovery committees that have been formed by the Shire. We're also members of our local Community Recovery Committee and the Upper Murray Recovery Committee. It's getting, you know, as you pointed out, Natalie, we're getting towards the end of this really difficult year, and we're ready for a break. We've had a lot of meetings, and the best thing that's happened this year is that we've all learned how to work out Zoom. So we're really happy about that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. And yes, pretty much worked out Zoom on my end. Thanks. I really appreciate you both sharing the work of UMI. I will do a shameless plug for you and note to anyone on the call, we do have a fundraising account with UMI to support their work. So, you know, donations and grants are always welcome for their really important vision for that region. And it is really exciting, and it's a stunning part of the world. So everyone should make an effort to get up there or down there, depending on where they're from. Now, I'm just very mindful people need to get going. So just a quick recap, you know, what we've seen and heard this year from an insights perspective, and which has just been completely reiterated by Ian and Joe. You know, there's increased needs, but fundraising capacity, immense volunteer fatigue is really taking its toll, and you know, a lot being asked of those communities. You know, we've got you know, a lot of uncertainty around COVID, and we really need to support organisations like UMI and others in their core capacity so that they can actually get on and make the biggest difference in recovery and beyond the recovery for that long-term vitality. It doesn't take a huge amount of money, but it does take some, and it's really important to back those organisations. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate everybody dialing on, and I hope that you've gained something from this. We will be sharing the link, and we'll be happy to have any follow-up conversations about anything that we've spoken about. So on that note, wishing you all a very safe festive season, and we look forward to working with you all again next year, and hopefully it will be a slightly smoother year, and we can all just work together on helping all of our communities to get back and going. So thanks very much.